We've been taught to think of treasure as something you dig up, like chests of gold or ancient artifacts. But the resource that actually keeps our world running today looks like this: a completely invisible gas flowing deep beneath the earth. This hidden wealth is the silent foundation of every modern empire, though you can't see it or touch it. Recent data suggests that nearly half the global population depends on the continuous flow of this substance for their daily survival. While most people assume this conversation is about crude oil, we are actually looking at a resource that is even more essential for keeping people alive. To understand why this invisible treasure matters so much, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and type "hidden treasure" in the comments. We are about to track the most significant unearthing of wealth in the modern age, a gas that provides the very lifeblood of our global food supply. On a massive industrial scale, we perform a process that looks like a page out of an alchemy book. We take raw gas from deep underground and transform it into physical matter. This creates what farmers call fertilizer. It is a concentrated powder that provides the specific nutrients soil needs to remain fertile and productive. Without this chemical intervention, the Earth's soil simply would not have the nutrients required to grow enough crops to feed 8 billion people. This entire process begins with the massive natural gas reserves found in the Persian Gulf, which provide the raw materials needed to create these nutrients. This industrial transformation turns Persian Gulf gas into the actual calories that sustain billions of people across the globe every single day. Over a century ago, researchers discovered a way to harvest nitrogen, a building block of life, directly from the air around us. But plants can't eat nitrogen directly. We process it by stripping hydrogen from natural gas and bonding it to nitrogen particles. This creates ammonia, the foundation of modern plant food. For transport, this ammonia becomes solid urea granules, shipped worldwide. The world's largest single deposit of the natural gas required for this reaction lies right between the borders of Iran and Qatar. This geography makes the Persian Gulf the primary manufacturing hub for the essential building blocks of global agriculture. We often view massive agricultural nations as self-sufficient giants, but their harvests are actually sustained by a constant supply of these imported chemicals. Brazil is a global powerhouse for soy and corn, yet they rely on imports for 85% of the nutrients needed to keep their soil productive. In India, the food supply for over 1 billion people depends on massive shipments of Gulf urea, which the government buys in bulk to ensure local farmers can afford to plant their crops. This creates a global conveyor belt of ships, moving millions of tons of chemicals from Persian Gulf ports to farms across every continent. Because these nations depend so heavily on imported nutrients, their entire food systems could be paralyzed if these supply lines are ever interrupted. Every single one of those ships must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway handles 40% of the world's natural gas and the majority of the region's fertilizer exports. Most media coverage of this region focuses on naval friction and the price of oil. However, any disruption here creates an immediate crisis for food. When the strait is threatened, gas prices rise, causing fertilizer factories to stop production and food prices to climb for families everywhere. This single, precarious waterway carries the invisible gas and the chemical nutrients that prevent a massive global food shortage. Controlling the Strait of Hormuz means managing the global food supply, a quiet power that determines whether the world's largest empires are able to feed their people.
Nitrogen is only part of the story. To sustain global agricultural yields, crops require a second, equally critical nutrient: phosphorus. Most of the world's phosphorus is extracted from massive phosphate rock mines in Morocco, China, and the United States. However, in its raw mineral form, this rock is insoluble. It is chemically inaccessible to plants and useless as a direct fertilizer. To create plant-ready fertilizers like DAP or MAP, processing plants must flood the raw rock with massive quantities of sulfuric acid. This chemical reaction is the only way to convert the ore into a soluble nutrient. This creates a heavy reliance on the industrial sulfur supply. Most elemental sulfur is actually a byproduct of natural gas processing and petroleum refining, industries concentrated in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. These Gulf states produce millions of tons of elemental sulfur annually. It is staged in massive piles at coastal ports before being shipped to phosphate processing hubs in Morocco and Brazil. This creates a global industrial disconnect. While the raw phosphate rock is mined in Africa and the Americas, the chemical required to process it must first pass through the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. To understand the fragility of this system, we can look at a simulation of a total 30-day closure of the strait. Within 5 days, global natural gas prices spike by 80%. Because gas is a primary feedstock for fertilizers like ammonia, the industry feels the shock immediately. Shipping halts as maritime insurance premiums increase tenfold, making it economically impossible for bulk carriers to move. By day 15, the factory freeze sets in. Fertilizer plants in Europe and South Asia, unable to afford the spike in natural gas, are forced to suspend ammonia production. Simultaneously, the phosphate hubs in North Africa and South America face a sulfur bottleneck. Without the steady arrival of bulk carriers, these plants must slash their output of finished fertilizer. In just 2 weeks, a localized maritime blockage stops the production of the world's most essential agricultural chemicals. By day 25, the impact reaches the local level. Because agricultural cooperatives typically do not hold months of surplus inventory in reserve, stockpiles of nitrogen and phosphate begin to run dry across the Americas. As reserves hit zero, retail prices for urea and DAPs skyrocket by 150%. At 30 days, farmers miss critical planting windows. Without affordable fertilizer, planted crops suffer from poor root development, leading to a significant drop in seasonal yields. This supply shock eventually hits the global commodities market. Grain and oilseed futures reach historic highs, creating extreme pressure on nations dependent on imported staples. Modern agriculture operates on a just-in-time delivery model, meaning our food system relies on the continuous flow of cargo. Because there are no long-term global reserves of fertilizer, a 30-day disruption in the strait can lead to reduced harvest volumes and food shortages 6 months later. Some analysts suggest bypassing the Strait of Hormuz using overland pipelines crossing Saudi Arabia to reach the Red Sea. But pipelines are designed for liquids and gas. They cannot move millions of tons of dry bulk solids, like elemental sulfur or urea granules. To move that same volume by road would require tens of thousands of trucks every day, driving across the desert. The fuel costs alone would make the fertilizer too expensive for the average farmer to use. There is also a significant infrastructure gap. The specialized docks and storage domes required to load massive bulk carriers are located inside the Gulf at ports like Mesaid and Jubail. Rebuilding this specialized export network outside the strait would take an estimated decade and cost hundreds of billions of dollars. The logistical reality is that our food supply is tied to the stability of the Persian Gulf. Until the world moves away from dependency on Gulf-processed sulfur, the security of the global food chain remains tied to the narrow waters of Hormuz.